When brilliant British professor Emily Carter falls for charming American architect Daniel Reed during a chance encounter in London, their whirlwind romance seems like the perfect love story. But beneath Daniel's flawless smile lies a deadly past, one that stretches across continents and leaves a trail of vanished women. As Emily follows the clues from London's art galleries to the dark alleys of New York, she uncovers a horrifying secret and realizes she may be the next to disappear. The wind in Kensington carried a faint chill that hinted at winter, even though it was only October. Daniel Reed stood in front of the Victoria and Albert Museum, checking the time on his phone for the third time. His meetings had wrapped up early, and he found himself with an unexpected free afternoon in a city that felt both foreign and strangely familiar. London had an elegance New York didn't, something in the quiet cobblestone streets and the way the light touched the old architecture. He didn't know then that this idle walk into a museum would redirect the course of his entire life. Inside, he wandered aimlessly at first, absorbing the quiet hum of voices, the clicking heels on the marble floor, and the soft glow of exhibit lights. Then he saw her. Emily Carter stood alone in front of a Renaissance painting, her arms crossed, head tilted slightly, completely immersed. She wasn't flashy or striking in the usual sense, but something about her presence drew him in like a whisper only he could hear. Daniel watched her for a moment longer than he should have. Unsure why, he felt his heart shift slightly in his chest. He told himself it was simple attraction, the kind that passes, but the moment stretched. Something about her posture, her calm intensity, it reminded him of stillness, something he hadn't felt in years. Emily, meanwhile, noticed him too. A tall man with a New York confidence and tired eyes, standing too long near the painting she loved. She pretended not to notice. But she felt it, the tension in the air. She wasn't the type to be swept up in moments. Her life was composed, academic, logical, yet something about him felt unfinished, like a sentence that demanded reading to the end. Their first words weren't exchanged for another 10 minutes, but something had already begun, quietly, invisibly. When they finally spoke, it was casual, about the artwork, about history, about the echo of footsteps in old museums, but underneath the surface, there was a strange warmth, an ache neither could place. Daniel hadn't planned on staying in London. Emily hadn't planned on letting anyone in. Over the following days, they kept finding reasons to meet again. A bookstore near Notting Hill, coffee by the Thames. Walks that lasted until the streetlights blinked on. Daniel laughed more than he had in months. Emily smiled in a way that reached her eyes. She began to forget her usual caution, telling herself she was simply living, just a moment of softness in a disciplined life. But even as they fell into rhythm, Emily felt a flicker of unease she couldn't name. He was charming, generous, present, yet there were cracks. Tiny pauses when she asked about his past. A flicker of something darker in his eyes when silence stretched too long. She ignored them. Everyone had shadows, she told herself. Maybe love was learning to live in them. Daniel felt it too, a pull toward something real. But behind his smile, behind every touch, he fought a secret, one he couldn't outrun forever. By the time spring bloomed over London, Emily's life had shifted in ways she couldn't quite explain. Daniel had become part of her daily world, a comforting presence in her flat, a constant in her thoughts, a name she spoke too easily. She hadn't meant for it to go so far, so fast. But with him, everything felt urgent and vivid. There were days she imagined a future, a life beyond lectures and quiet solitude. Yet beneath the surface, a strange discomfort began to take root. It wasn't loud, not even clear, but it lingered like a low hum in the background of her joy. She started noticing details, small things, easily dismissed but too frequent to ignore. The time he left his phone in another room, whenever they were together. The way he changed the subject when she asked about his ex-wife. He had told her about a divorce, said it was complicated, and she had accepted that. But now, even the word divorced felt unstable, as though it were balancing on half-truths. When she asked to meet someone from his past, an old friend, a colleague from New York, He dodged, always with a reason that sounded reasonable, always with a smile that calmed her nerves, just enough. But doubt has a sharp edge. Once it cuts, it never quite disappears. One night, after Daniel had fallen asleep beside her, she lay in the dark, eyes open, heart restless. She tried to dismiss the thoughts as paranoia. Maybe she was afraid of being happy. Maybe she was sabotaging what could be real. But deep down, something didn't fit. His stories overlapped oddly. A restaurant he claimed to love in Manhattan had apparently closed years ago. A friend he mentioned, Greg from college, had a different last name the second time he came up. Alone in the night, these tiny fractures became louder. Emily's academic mind wouldn't let go of the inconsistencies. So one afternoon, while Daniel stepped out to take a call, another mysterious one he said was about a property deal, she opened his laptop. Guilt burned through her fingers as she typed. But it wasn't blind curiosity. It was fear, cloaked in reason. The search began harmlessly. She typed his full name, Daniel Reed. Most results were exactly what she expected. Work articles, interviews, photos. But further down she saw something else. A court case linked to his name from 2 years ago in New York. And then a missing person notice. Vanessa Hill, last seen leaving an art gallery in Chelsea. Acquaintance, Daniel Reed. Her breath caught. She clicked. The image was grainy, but the woman's eyes stared back with a haunting familiarity. Something about the expression felt too close to home. Emily sat frozen, heart pounding against her ribs. Could it be coincidence? Could there be two Daniel Reeds? She closed the browser, shut the laptop, and tried to breathe. When Daniel returned, smiling, holding coffee for her like always, she smiled back, but her stomach curled. His presence felt heavier now, like standing beside a stranger wearing a mask of someone she once trusted. She didn't confront him, not yet. Instead, she pretended. She listened. She planned. And when he asked her to move with him to New York, she said yes. But inside, something inside her had changed completely. The plane touched down in New York under a heavy gray sky. Emily looked out the window, unsure if she felt excitement, fear, or something in between. Daniel squeezed her hand gently as the aircraft taxied, his thumb brushing hers in a gesture meant to comfort. She responded with a faint smile, but her heart was not in it. The decision to move hadn't been made in a moment of love. It had been made in silence, in the shadow of unanswered questions. She told herself she needed to see more, to learn more. She needed to be closer to the truth. Their new apartment was stunning. High ceilings, glass walls overlooking Central Park, carefully curated furniture with no signs of previous life. It felt like a hotel, polished and beautiful, but somehow hollow. Daniel unpacked quickly, moving through the space with an ease that suggested he'd been here before. Emily watched him closely. He smiled more in New York, but there was something unnatural about it, like someone mimicking the man she knew in London. She filled her days with walks, museums, and small errands, trying to learn the city while staying alert. Daniel left often, claiming to be working on private architecture projects. He never brought her along. He never mentioned his office. The more she asked, the more carefully he answered. It was always just enough to satisfy, never enough to trust. And still she pretended to believe. One afternoon, Emily was alone in the apartment when a noise drew her to the bedroom. The closet door stood slightly ajar, though she was sure she hadn't opened it. Curiosity pulled her forward. Inside, between crisp suits and linen shirts, she noticed a narrow panel at the back, not quite aligned with the rest of the wall. Her fingers moved almost without thinking, and the panel slid open with a soft click. Behind it was a small compartment, dark and dusty. Inside were items that didn't belong in Daniel's story. 2 driver's licenses, each bearing different names and photos, both of Daniel, several photographs of women she didn't recognize, tucked in an old envelope, a worn passport with a long trail of international stamps, Greece, Morocco, Brazil, none of which Daniel had ever mentioned. Emily's stomach sank, Her mind raced. These weren't the mistakes of a man with secrets. These were the traces of someone hiding an entire life. She put everything back carefully, closed the panel, and returned to the kitchen. Her hands trembled as she poured water, trying to steady herself. She wasn't just suspicious anymore. She was afraid. That night, as Daniel made dinner and spoke about redecorating the apartment, Emily smiled and nodded. She even laughed at a story he told, though she couldn't hear half of it. Inside, she was calculating. Every second spent pretending was another moment closer to the truth, but she couldn't show her fear, not yet. Then, the first message came. An envelope slipped under the door. No return address. Inside, a single sheet of paper with one sentence written in block letters. Ask him about Vanessa. Emily sat down, her legs weak beneath her. The silence around her felt louder than ever before. She realized she wasn't the only one watching Daniel, and that meant time was running out. The morning Emily disappeared, the city was unusually quiet. Rain slid down the windows like tears no one dared to wipe away. Daniel's voice cracked when he called the police, reporting her missing. He said she'd left to meet a friend for brunch and never returned. He paced the apartment, his shirt untucked, his expression hollow, convincing in its grief. To the world he was a man devastated by the loss of the woman he loved. But behind the mourning eyes, something else lived: calculation, or perhaps the calm of someone who had practiced pain in the mirror. The police arrived quickly. Their questions were routine at first. Had she taken anything with her? Any signs of distress? Anyone she might have gone to? Daniel had answers ready. No, she was happy. No, nothing seemed wrong. Yes, he would do anything to help. He offered tea, showed them photographs of their life together, a framed picture from London on the mantel. He was every bit the concerned partner. But something didn't sit right with the detectives. It was subtle, a sense that the man grieving before them was too careful. His version of Emily was painted in perfection, almost like a story rehearsed too many times. Days passed. The media picked up the story. "British woman vanishes in Manhattan," the headlines read. Daniel stood on camera, voice trembling as he begged for help, for answers, for her safe return. His words touched hearts, sparked sympathy, but beneath the public outcry, the investigation deepened. The apartment held no signs of struggle. Emily's belongings were untouched, her passport still in the drawer, her favorite scarf hanging by the door, yet there was something in her absence that felt intentional, like a puzzle missing just one piece, deliberately so. Then came the message, an anonymous envelope delivered to the NYPD. Inside was a hand-drawn map with a single GPS coordinate and one typed sentence: "You're looking in the wrong place." It led to a wooded area near the Hudson River, isolated and cold. Police searched with cautious hope. What they found there changed everything. Buried in a shallow grave was a woman's body. Not Emily, but Vanessa Hill, the same name Emily had uncovered months before. Her body had been there for years, hidden beneath soil and silence. Dental records confirmed her identity. Alongside her remains was a necklace, tarnished but recognizable from a missing persons photo. The case against Daniel grew sharp overnight. Detectives began re-examining everything: his aliases, his movements, his financials. The photos Emily had found, the hidden IDs, the mysterious trips, all of it painted a picture of a man who wasn't grieving but hiding. Yet one question remained unanswered. Where was Emily? No blood, no witnesses, no trace. Her last known steps vanished into nothing. Behind closed doors, Daniel maintained his innocence. He mourned in public and smiled behind walls. But the pressure was building. The discovery of Vanessa's body cracked open a door Daniel had worked years to keep shut. And somewhere beyond the headlines, in the quiet space between doubt and truth, Emily's presence still lingered, like a shadow refusing to disappear. Daniel sat in the sterile courtroom, dressed in a tailored gray suit, his hands folded neatly in his lap. His expression was solemn, unreadable, like a painting designed to mimic grief. He had always been good at faces, at showing just enough vulnerability to pass as genuine. But behind the stillness was a man bracing for the collapse of the world he'd built on deception. The media swarmed the courthouse, cameras flashing like gunfire. Manhattan Monster, they called him. Headlines painted him as a serial manipulator, a predator cloaked in charm. But inside the courtroom, the evidence spoke louder than any name. Vanessa Hill's remains had been the turning point. With her discovery, prosecutors began unraveling Daniel's carefully constructed life. The pattern was undeniable. For nearly a decade, Daniel had moved between cities, always under a new name, always with a new story. Women met him in bookstores, art galleries, hotel bars. He was successful, attentive, sensitive, the perfect man, until he wasn't. The prosecutors presented photos of women who had dated him. Some had escaped with their hearts broken. Others had disappeared. The jurors listened silently as the timeline unfolded. Vanessa Hill had been his first known victim, but whispers of others reached further back. In one case, a woman had reported fraud. In another, there were rumors of domestic violence, dismissed for lack of evidence. But the disappearance of Emily Carter was different. She had left behind no struggle, no note, only a growing trail of clues she had followed quietly. Among the most damning evidence was Emily's journal, found hidden behind a loose floorboard in their New York apartment. In neat, tense handwriting, she had recorded her fears, her discoveries, the photographs, the IDs, the lies. She had written about Vanessa, about the unease she couldn't ignore. Her final entry sent chills through the courtroom. "He's not who he says he is. If anything happens to me, start in New York." That sentence echoed like a confession from beyond the grave. Still, without Emily's body, the prosecution faced an uphill battle for a second murder charge. The defense insisted there was no proof she was dead, that she had left Daniel, perhaps even faked her own disappearance. They painted her as paranoid, emotionally unstable, manipulated by her own imagination. But the jury wasn't convinced. Too much lined up, too many patterns, too much coincidence to be anything but intentional. The courtroom grew colder as the trial neared its end. Daniel never cried, never raised his voice. He simply watched, as if observing a life that no longer belonged to him. And in a way, it didn't. Whatever mask he had worn had slipped. Now the world saw him, not as a grieving partner, but as a ghost maker. What no one expected came just days before the verdict. The courtroom door opened, and a woman stepped inside. Thin, pale, visibly shaken, but alive. Emily Carter. She stood under the harsh fluorescent lights, eyes wide but unafraid. The silence shattered. Daniel's expression, for the first time, broke. Not anger, not fear. Something colder, recognition. He had lost. Emily hadn't been destroyed. She had been watching, waiting, and she was ready to finish what she had started. Gasps echoed through the courtroom as Emily Carter stepped into the light, her presence silencing the tension that had gripped the room for weeks. Cameras clicked, pens paused mid-sentence, and even the judge leaned slightly forward, stunned. Emily, believed dead, vanished without a trace, stood calm and alive. Yet beneath the surface, she was holding herself together with threads of resolve. Every eye was on her, but her gaze stayed fixed on one man. Dan. For a second, he didn't blink. Then his jaw tightened, ever so slightly. There was no explosion of emotion, no dramatic outburst. Just a shift, like glass cracking under silent pressure. Emily had been the one thing he believed he had buried completely, but here she was, breathing proof that his control had failed. She took the stand slowly, her steps measured, her voice was soft, almost too quiet, but unwavering. She told the court everything, how she had discovered the lies, how she had faked her own disappearance, how she had worked with a private investigator, using a false name to vanish and gather evidence from the shadows. It hadn't been easy. She had left behind everything, her name, her past, even the truth of who she was. She had lived in fear every day, watching news reports, waiting for the trial to reach the tipping point. She hadn't known if she would ever be safe again, but she had survived. Her testimony unraveled whatever defense Daniel had left. There were no longer gaps in the story, no room for doubt. Her words were not emotional, they were factual, deliberate, devastating. She described the hidden compartments, the fake IDs, the photos of other women. She read directly from her own journal entries, each line a thread weaving Daniel into the web he had spun for years. Daniel didn't look at her. Not once. Not while she spoke, not while the courtroom murmured, not even when the judge called for silence. His eyes stared ahead, as though if he focused hard enough, he could erase her from reality. But he couldn't. The prosecution rested its case that day. No final speeches were needed. Emily's appearance had said everything. 2 days later, the verdict came. Guilty on all counts. For the murder of Vanessa Hill, for attempted murder, for fraud, for identity theft. The sentencing was swift. Life in prison without the possibility of parole. The courtroom emptied, and Daniel was led away, hands cuffed, head low. He didn't look back. Emily stepped outside into the sunlight for the first time without fear. Reporters shouted her name. Flashbulbs flared. But she didn't stop. Her eyes were tired, but she walked forward, her breath steady, her feet certain. She had loved once, deeply, foolishly, dangerously. She had almost died for it. But now she had reclaimed her life. She was no longer a shadow in someone else's story. Emily Carter had survived the man who tried to erase her. And that, more than any verdict, was justice.